Hi guys, Andy Willson here, the Sneakonomist. So in this part of the series, we're going to start looking at the second quarter and the spread of coronavirus moving to a more westernized world. In the previous series, where the link is in the description below, we looked at how coronavirus started, where it started, and the implications it had on manufacturing, as well as growth in the Asia Pacific region. But now we're going to fast forward. We're going to go to Q2. March the 23rd in particular was the date in the UK where we were forced into our lockdown. That meant, as you'll all recall, we were allowed to go out to food shop, we were allowed to go out to exercise once a day. If we couldn't work from home, we were allowed to travel to and from, and that was pretty much it. At this point in time, stock markets were really starting to worry. The stock market itself and individual share prices are basically a barometer of people's expectations and how healthy an economy or a business is. The problem with this is when you have uncertainty. When there is uncertainty, people can't factor in the outcome that we're actually going to see. So what we saw in this instance was that stock markets in just under a month fell by 40%. And that includes some of the brands like Nike and Adidas. And if we look at some of the wholesalers, the likes of JD Sports and Foot Locker, their shares were down between 60 and 70%. As I say, there was so much uncertainty. You had stores being shut down. Manufacturing was starting to recover again in China, but because it had now moved over to the West, the uncertainty was so huge, people didn't really know what to expect. So what was the initial implications? Workers in hospitality, retail, customer-facing roles, etc. were furloughed or received government stimulus if you were in the US. In the States, they saw the unemployment rate went from the lowest ever at 3.5%. In a matter of weeks, it shot up to 14.7%, which is the highest it's been since the Great Depression in 1929. So there were some winners amongst this sort of time. So let's have a look now at who those winners were. We were working from home. We were having to spend time indoors, keep ourselves occupied. There was a greater impetus put on exercising because people were saying that if you caught COVID, if you were fit and healthier, then you would suffer maybe slightly less of the symptoms. So we had to suddenly start be self-sufficient from home. So with regards to working, Zoom, Microsoft Teams were very, very successful. Netflix, obviously, as people started to stream stuff. Disney Plus got hit in two different angles. They were hurt because their parks were had to shut, but the Disney Plus platform that they had released saw the subscriber numbers absolutely smash through their estimates because people were suddenly stuck indoors. Amazon, obviously, it's the first place that so many people now just go when they're looking to buy something because you can get it the next day. They were already geared up to be able to cope with this. They just didn't realize how important being that geared up would be at the time. Now, office furniture as well, that was important. Laptops, TVs, they just sold out across the country. Even garden furniture, people were having to spend more time at home, so they wanted to spruce up the house, spruce up the garden. I touched on fitness, so things like Peloton, again, an unbelievable timing from them with regards to people having to work out from home. So you had your Peloton cycle and they were streaming content to you to be able to be self-sufficiently working out at home. Dumbbells, all these bits and pieces, weights, benches, etc. were all selling out, and you saw dumbbell sets going for ridiculous premiums on the likes of eBay, etc. Yoga mats was one of the biggest selling items in the first half of the year. And also, let's not forget running shoes, as people were going out and pounding the pavements more, and that was an obvious place for people to have to go out and make purchases. But we'll talk a bit more about running shoes in a moment. So with the government stimulus, with people not necessarily commuting to work, people couldn't go on holidays, people had more money to spend. People were bored. This online fitness drive was spurring more purchases. So during times of trouble, people will tend to gravitate towards reliable, well-known brands. Now, we heard from the Puma CEO at the end of their Q2 results, and he described that quarter as the most difficult quarter ever. These businesses that we were hearing from were in out-and-out survival mode. They were getting government loans themselves. They were asking for rent holidays because their stores were shut. Adidas particularly got called out for this, as they weren't wanting to pay some of their rent. It's a little bit unfair. It's not unfair if you're the landlord, but there should be governments having stuff in place to be able to support everyone through the chain. And what we've actually found through a lot of this is that some of the stores, etc., haven't had the backing and have had to continue paying rent. But Adidas did continue to pay their rent. They were also making staff cuts, whether it's redundancies, etc., just tweaking and cutting costs at head office. Obviously, there's less travel going on for business purposes. From the stock price, from the stock market point of view, dividends were being suspended, which is something that companies will reward shareholders once or twice a year by paying a dividend to the shareholders as a thank you for owning the shares. Also, share buybacks. It's something that companies can buy back their own stock if they feel it's at cheap enough levels. And those are the sorts of things that were all being suspended as these businesses locked down into full-on survival mode. So any businesses that were bricks and mortar heavy, so that they had a subpar online business and were actually more exposed to the high street, were suffering. Those that had an established or growing online platform really benefited. And in this quarter, we saw astronomical gains in online orders. Some of them we were seeing numbers rising from 70 to even 100% from that same quarter of the previous year. And we talk about DTC, which is a big push for these manufacturers. Those that aren't aware, it stands for direct to consumer, and it involves the brand manufacturer themselves selling the product as opposed to selling it to a wholesaler or a store to sell on their behalf. There's much more margin benefit for them to be able to do that. And we saw DTC sales for these manufacturers pushing through 30%. Now, the sales for online didn't fully offset the loss of bricks and mortar sales. So for this quarter, we did see sales drop 30 to 40%. We had wholesalers, so this is the Foot Lockers and the JD Sports, were cancelling some orders. Where they could, they were probably sending some product back to the manufacturers. There's an RTV, which is return to vendor. That's something that when something isn't sold, it can be sent back. I'll talk more about that in in the series. There were some delayed releases and inventory levels became key. If you carry too much inventory going into this period, then you're potentially going to have to cut the prices of these items to be able to shift them. If it's non-seasonal stuff or evergreen, you can mothball that and you can put that to one side and you can sell it the following season, the next year. If it's seasonal, if it's stuff that needs to be shifted, then that's when businesses have to discount and do some heavy promotional activity. If you don't have enough inventory, you miss out on sales. The demand that Adidas saw in the US in 2018 and 2019, for instance, because they couldn't get the product to the right places in America, they ended up missing out on sales. And the shares would react upon that as shareholders punish them for basically missing out on sales. So who were what were the real winners, the categories that really won in the apparel and the sneaker side of the market? So comfy clothing. People weren't having to travel to work. People may have been working from home. I didn't wear a suit or jeans for months upon end. I was in jogging bottoms or shorts in the summer. So comfy clothing was definitely in a huge amount of demand. Sliders and sandals. We've heard from the likes of Crocs and Birkenstock that have had very, very good years, believe it or not, because people are all about comfort and staying at home, so they want comfortable footwear. Sneakers as well, obviously for relaxing, as well as exercising. Running increased in popularity, as you'd imagine, but interestingly, it wasn't necessarily your archetypal running brands that were benefiting, because people had already been running that were buying those brands. We were looking more at beginners, entry-level sneakers, as well as sort of the medium sort of tech, if you like, people were buying. It coincided very nicely with Nike's Vaporfly and the success that they were seeing, but also brands like On Running and Hoka One, which have a nice message and have a bit more of a niche following that people were sort of flocking to there. Some of the other areas that did well, bike shops were selling bikes left, right and centre. My local bike shop suddenly stopped doing all servicing of bikes because they were so busy selling bikes, so you couldn't go and get your bike serviced. Maybe that was a clever ploy to get people to buy new bikes. Basketball hoops, because kids are at home, they need to entertain themselves, so at home basketball hoop systems were very, very popular. Believe it or not, kayaks saw some of the best sales numbers that they have ever seen, but a lot of these purchases are what's called one and done. So now going forward, we're going to be looking into Q3 and when things start to reopen again and some of the struggles that the businesses are seeing. So please join us for the next.